When a story, a character, or a franchise is retold, reimagined, or rebooted for the big screen, what is it you look forward to seeing the most? For me, it's seeing a fresh and unique take on the material. I want this new representation to deviate from previous incarnations. Show me something I haven't seen before, or make me feel a different emotion towards a familiar element.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
I don't have a problem with a film adaptation being faithful to the source material. For instance, I'm a big fan of Tim Burton's introduction to Batman. It's clearly adapted from Batman's first appearance in the early DC comics, which is great, because it works. And it's also interesting to see how Burton successfully translates a different medium into a filmic form. Now, what I don't want to see is the same story told over and over without enough changes to warrant it being made in the first place. A lot of remakes and reboots fall into this category because a familiar name sells a ticket, and I find the horror genre is the largest and worst culprit for this mistake by far. Fortunately, Batman is a franchise that never seems to disappoint in this regard. With each iteration, there's a clear redesign in thematics, tone, plot, characterizations and/or style, for better or for worse.
Excuse me. Have you ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight? 7 million. Never leave the cave without it.
On a side note, I think a film sometimes needs to deviate from the source material. For example, Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood. For those of you who don't know this film, its story was an adaptation of Shakespeare's Macbeth. What makes it interesting to me is that Kurosawa's unique craft of filmmaking alters how certain scenes are represented compared to the play, and the integration of Japanese folklore and setting transform this film into something new and different. It raises the question, would it be as good if it was a more faithful adaptation? When a reboot or remake of a franchise doesn't make enough changes from a previous version, I find I'm drawn out of the experience. My engagement and enjoyment of the film is diminished, and I become bored. This is exactly how I felt about Mark Webb's The Amazing Spider-Man. The character development, motivations, themes, and plot had too many similarities with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. It all felt a little too familiar.
If you could do good things for other people, you had a moral obligation to do those things. That's what's at stake here. Not choice, responsibility.
In my opinion, Raimi's origin film is a more well-crafted film, in both the elements that are different and similar.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
With each reimagining of the Batman character and story, we see a huge array of differences, not only in the elements that are new and different, but also in the elements that are similar. To give an example, I'll be comparing Tim Burton's 1989 Batman to Christopher Nolan's 2005 Batman Begins. I understand that Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever and Batman and Robin are in between the films I've picked, but I see Schumacher's Batman films as a continuation of Burton's established universe. Although this point is very debatable, Schumacher's direction undeniably reimagined Batman's cinematic tone and style. For me, they are a guilty pleasure. Although, Batman and Robin killed the franchise, so Christopher Nolan and writer David S. Goyer understood they'd have to make significant changes to bring Batman back to the silver screen.
From the beginning, my interest was in taking on a superhero story but treating it in a realistic fashion.
If they were going to restart the Batman franchise, something very dramatic would have to be done, something very different.
Nolan and Goyer's direction of grounding their Batman film in a realistic universe lent itself to the story they wanted to tell. Tim Burton's 1989 reboot of Batman had a similar effect in that it was completely different from the previous incarnation. And the changes made only improved the quality of the film. This is what I like to see in remakes and reboots, something new and interesting. What makes the Batman films stand out to me as good examples of how to make reboots is how they use a story element from the source material to different effect. The deaths of Thomas and Martha Wayne are intrinsic in the forming of Batman as a character, and neither Burton nor Nolan deviate from using the scene for that same purpose, but there are differences. Firstly, Burton's opening sequence subverts expectations as we presume we're watching Bruce's traumatic past, or at the very least, these are characters who are important to the film's story. This sequence serves as an introduction to Batman, and an indicator that this film is going to be different from what is expected. The placement of the Wayne's murder is very important. As the story moves towards the final conflict, Bruce discovers the Joker is the man who shot his parents. This change doesn't affect the outcome of Bruce becoming Batman, it adds a whole new perspective on a scene which will always be in Batman remakes and reboots. The Joker is Batman's arch enemy. They are complete opposites, and this change shows how interconnected they are.
You idiot! You made me.
I made you. You made me first.
Bruce now has a strong personal motivation to fight the Joker, and we watch in anticipation as the stakes are raised and the final act draws closer to conflict. Bruce goes to fight the Joker straight after an emotional revelation, which is perfect for the pacing of this story. It reminds me of how both Spider-Man films used the death of Uncle Ben differently. Both had the same resolution, that Peter Parker comes to understand Uncle Ben's speech and responsibility and becomes Spider-Man.
With great power comes great responsibility. Remember that, Pete. Remember that.
Like Burton, Raimi used the emotion of the moment to spur the protagonist into conflict. There's more investment due to having the emotional scene motivate the action, heightening the tension and drama until the sequence peaks, and it's revealed that Peter inadvertently was the cause of his uncle's death. The film then has room to breathe as the pace slows down and allows Peter to grieve and come to his resolution of becoming Spider-Man. In The Amazing Spider-Man, the traumatic death of Uncle Ben plays out exactly the same, except the emotion of the moment isn't used to any effect. Instead, the film's pace slows down and the excitement is lost, meaning the entire subplot of Peter hunting down Uncle Ben's killer has less engagement. Mark Webb altered how Peter comes to terms with the responsibility of his powers by having a character tell Peter and the audience about why Spider-Man shouldn't be seeking revenge. The golden rule of visual storytelling is to show and not tell. Back to Batman, Burton uses Bruce's origin story for a unique effect in developing character motivations and to create a stronger dynamic between protagonist and antagonist. Christopher Nolan uses this same plot point in a completely different manner. Because Nolan and Goya grounded their film in a realistic universe, it was important to them to figure out who Bruce Wayne is as a person. They wanted to go back to his roots and tell an in-depth origin story. Their usage of the death of the Waynes is played very straightforward and very faithfully to the comics. This scene serves as a solid foundation for crafting a strong character arc for Bruce Wayne. As Goya says, it's about how Bruce Wayne went from an orphan child to a man who had a hole in his heart, to eventually become this mythic figure. Goya goes on to say, in the other Batman films, the characters are fully formed or fully emerged. So in this character-driven reboot, Bruce Wayne's most traumatic moment isn't the sole reason for why he creates Batman. It's a smaller piece of a larger character arc. In this scene, we also have more subtle ties to Bruce's character, for instance, his undercurrent of guilt.
It was my fault, Alfred. I made them leave the theater. If I hadn't gotten scared.
My anger outweighs my guilt.
The effects of the Wayne's murder ripple into later development of character motivations, thematics, and plot. Unfortunately, a lot of these scenes are conveyed through exposition.
Their murder shocked the wealthy and the powerful into action.
We underestimated certain of Gotham's citizens, such as your parents.
Although, I feel these scenes are a little more earned than in other films. From this one origin scene, themes, plots, characters, and motivations are constantly being built on and evolved throughout the rest of the film, creating a new and interesting usage of Batman's origin story. I've painted reboots that take a different approach to the source material or deviate from previous versions in a very positive light, and the truth is, this approach doesn't always have the desired effect. There are plenty of remakes and reboots that do something different with the source material, and for whatever reasons, they end up being bad films. I'm currently working on an in-depth analysis on remakes and reboots that don't quite work out, and about ones that shouldn't have been made at all. These videos will be coming out soon, so stay tuned for them. But as I said at the beginning, in a retold, reimagined or rebooted story, what I look forward to seeing the most is a fresh and unique take on the material, and the Batman films rarely disappoint me. But behind that desire to see something new, I also want to see a well-crafted film, or at the very least, one that entertains me. But what about you? What is it you look forward to seeing the most in a remake or reboot?